Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Transformative Justice Coalition and Rainbow Push Coalition as we present Voting Rights Under Attack Physically and Politically, Preparing to Win the Voting Rights Fight in 2024. I'm attorney Daryl Jones. I'm the board chair of the Transformative Justice Coalition, as well as the co-leader along with attorney Barbara Arnwine. We're really excited that you all have decided to join us for this presentation, this session. I always say that it is one of the most substantive sessions that you will probably ever experience dealing with voting rights in the United States. I can tell you that the Transformative Justice Coalition, along with Rainbow Push, we have gone through the South. We have gone out to the Midwest. We've gone deep into Florida. Matter of fact, we're just coming out of Florida from a rolling protest where we were there for a week during the Juneteenth celebration, fighting the policies that have been put in place in the state of Florida with regards to voting rights, and as it also applies to ban books, as it applies to labor rights, as it applies to women's reproductive rights. All of these things we understand stem from that right to vote and the assault on the right to vote, because that then spills over into those that are elected into positions and impose policies for the voters and the citizens of the various states throughout the country. We're really honored to have with us today just an esteemed panelist of guests. We have with us Griselda Vega Samuel, who is the Midwest Regional Counsel for the Mexican American League of Defense and Education Fund, otherwise known as MALDEF. We also have with us Rommel Sandino, who is the National Organization Director of the League of Women Voters. We have with us Betty Magnus, who is an Illinois political director with Rainbow Push Coalition. We also have with us two of the Freedom Riders that went down to the state of Florida. They're also TJC fellows. One hails from here in Chicago, Illinois, an educator by the name of Edward Ward. The other is out of Louisiana, who's just continues to bring it from Louisiana, continues to fight for the right to vote, and all, particularly Gen Zs that are in Louisiana and across the country. And she is the person of Jada Jeffrey. So I want to welcome our panelists to this discussion. It's my privilege to start with some opening remarks from the founder as well as the president of the Transformative Justice Coalition. She's not only a friend, and not only a mentor, not only a fighter, but we refer to her as the Queen Mother of Election Protection, one of the most fierce fighters for voting rights in the country that exists. I always say if the Supreme Court would simply listen to Barbara Arnwine, we wouldn't need to have sessions like this. Ladies and gentlemen, Barbara Arnwine.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are so happy to see you here, and to everyone watching on live stream, YouTube, Facebook. Thank you so much for participating in this dialogue and this discussion. We all know that we are facing a drastic time in the fight for the right to vote in America. As the demographics of this country has changed and continue to change, there are people who will do anything in their power to ensure white political domination. And they don't care what the people vote for, what the people want. All they want is to maintain power, even if it's artificially, even if it means the destruction of American democracy. But they got one problem. No matter what they want, they got to deal with something called us. And there is no way in this day and age that we will be deterred from seeking, fighting for, making sure that a inclusive, robust, and just multiracial democracy is achieved. So with that said, Daryl, I turn it back to you, because we got a whole lot of talking about what we do between now and 2024, November, to make sure that the people win. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And Barbara, I want to set the stage with you.
Yes.
Sort of a foundational piece here. Could you provide, because oftentimes we enter into these conversations where we're talking about voting rights being under attack and people not being able to vote, and a lot of folks say, well, of course you have the right to vote. Of course you have, no one's stopping you from being able to vote. I don't understand what you're talking about when you're saying your voting rights are being attacked. Attacked by whom? What does it mean? What are the examples that you can provide to those people that are asking those questions?
Wow. Number of examples. First of all, after the 2016 election, a whole lot of states started doubling down on the voter suppression that they started in 2011. After the 2010, after the 2008 election of Obama, then in 2010, there was the midterm elections, and a whole lot of people, some 25 million people who voted in the presidential, sat out that election. And so these, some 30 states turned into the direction of one party. And that party started immediately passing voter suppression laws. And if you think I'm kidding, go to tjcoalition.org and see the 72 forms of voter suppression, which will show you the magnitude and the expansiveness of the fight against the right to vote. Who are the democracy forces? They are people who are, one, really determined, as I mentioned before, to maintain power. There are people who believe that this nation is, quote, a white nation, and that any power sharing with people of color is just not necessary. And they're people who are determined for monetarily reasons, because frankly, people of color tend to vote more liberal. And they believe in social justice. They believe in holding corporations accountable. These are frankly contrary to some corporate interests. And so one of the hidden stories about the voter suppression fight is that a lot of the voter suppression legislators are supported by corporations who just don't want to be regulated and held accountable for their climate practices, for their greed, for all the other things that they do wrong. And be clear, folks, this battle is more extensive than we ever thought, because we are living in an age where they're trying to bring back what? Child labor. State after state, child labor laws are under attack. That's how rampant and desirous of being anti-regulated these corporate entities are. So we need to understand that part of our battle here is not just a battle for the right to vote, but the most critical thing about the right to vote is making sure that we build a phalanx against all of these greedy, illegal practices. But they want to do it. They are so determined. When you look at, people don't connect the issues, and throughout this panel, we're going to connect the issues, because people don't understand that the white replacement theory that is dominant on Fox News and a whole lot of other programs and channels is on the theory that whites are being displaced from their power, from their righteous positions that they believe to rule over us. And so part of the battle that we have to understand is that when we're talking about the Dobbs decision and the abortion and reproductive rights folks, that a lot of that is about, as Freddie Haynes just said, about guaranteeing white babies. because they really believe that they're being outbirthed, out whatever. And instead of recognizing that women want the right to succeed in this society, women want the right to determine when they should have a child. They want the right to determine their economic security and freedom. So all of these issues are coming together. And what's important for us is that we have to be the pro-democracy forces. We have to be the forces that say we won't wait. We won't allow people to run roughshod over our rights. So, Daryl, the other forces, of course, I mentioned, the white supremacists. I mentioned the corporate forces. I mentioned there's a party called the GOP. And I'm just saying what they're doing, folks, because they introduced last week, they had a major hearing on what's called the American Confidence in Elections Act. And if you want to see some voter suppression proposals, you read that act. Because what they want to do is do away with what? Early voting. They want to do away, there's been 2,000 less polling places available to voters, even though the population has grown by millions of eligible voters. There's been, this whole attack. I mean, I tell you guys, I would never thought I would see the day where the boogie bear of the century would be a ballot collection box, a mail ballot collection box, where they just are, they don't want any, people to have, the drop-in ballots at these boxes, where they're trying to get rid of vote by mail in any and every way they can, where they're restricting voting based on very limited numbers of IDs. I can go through it forever, but I won't. Because we want to have a good panel discussion. I hope that lays the ground, Daryl, as you asked for, and that we can have the discussion that we must have in these times.
Thank you, Barbara. One of the things, Betty Magnus, that I find really interesting is as Barbara was going through the American Confidence in Election Act, otherwise known as ACE, that legislatively is focused on trying to reduce drop boxes to make it easier for people to vote, make them more difficult. It eliminates same-day voter registration so that people can't register the same day. It would require the exact signature check, name match, all this other stuff. But there's another side that's been going on as well, a non-legislative side that has been a little more physical. So, for instance, in Chicago, during the mayoral election that just went through, there were some other voter suppression techniques and tactics that were used. Could you share with us some of the things that you heard about or experienced in the city of Chicago during that mayoral election that isn't necessarily the legislative side of this, but the physical side of what we're talking about with these concerns regarding access to voting?
Well, we had quite a few. I won't say we didn't have hundreds, because I am very proud to say that Illinois has the most liberal voting policies of almost any state, but everybody has a trick. So the thing that I ran into most were in minority communities. They tried to challenge people's ability to walk into the polling place. There was a lady in a wheelchair in a semi-Republican kind of neighborhood. We don't really have a lot of that. But she was stopping people from coming into the polling place using her wheelchair. And of course, I run Election Central at Rainbow Push. On election day, we always have a Rainbow Election Central. And I got a call about it. And I called the Lawyers for Civil Rights. Yes. But I also have lawyers on call with me. And they went over and told her that was illegal. And she wanted to get angry. But they threatened to call the police on her. We used to have police in the precincts on election day. They stopped that. They said it costs too money, which is fine with me. We have people. We have a lot of activists that come out and volunteer. But it was primarily on the north side areas. It was primarily in areas where there were Hispanics, and they didn't realize that we are bound and determined to vote in Chicago and the surrounding suburbs. So we took care of it. We have our own people. Oh God, we took care of it. But the thing I want to say about Illinois, we have same day registration. We have drop boxes. And one of the best thing we have is the voting places that open up for early voting. And we have laws that are being passed to make them mandatory for every election. Right now, we only have the legislation that passed only goes until 24, but we're going to get that passed. And what that means for people who have elderly parents, for example, and they work on election day, they can pick them up and take them, and they both can vote at the same time because you don't have to vote in your precinct. And we're finding that more people are using early voting than waiting until election day. And on election day, if I had an elderly parent, well, I wouldn't because I'm elderly now, but my son could take me to vote with him, and we could go downtown or we could go near his job. We could go anywhere in the city, and we use major spots. In the big election, we used the United Center, where the Bulls play basketball. We had Sox Park as a voting site, so that we make it convenient for people. But everybody has a trick. So we really have to watch out for it. And we get lots of calls because people will call push because they don't trust the system. So if somebody's doing something wrong in a polling place, they'll call us and ask us, what can we do? We use the state's attorney's office, but most of the time we call 188 our vote. Or I'll call Barbara. We've had to call Barbara for some problems. If we could pull in the big guns. We don't play. If you're doing something wrong and you want to vote, and I tell everybody, when you get in the polling place and they're giving you problems, do not leave.
Right.
Take your cell phone with you if you're having problems. If they try to get you to vote by, why am I drawing a blank? Affidavit. Thank you, Attorney Parker. Do not. You call push, you call 1-888-our-VOTE, you call Transformative Justice. Never leave the polling place until you vote.
Yes.
And if they find out that you're adamant, sometimes they just back down and let you go ahead and vote. They're not supposed to ask you for ID. I'm in the polling place and they're asking, don't give them nothing. In this state, you do not have to show them anything.
Thank you, Betty. And I know that Ramel is nipping at the bit to get in on this, and so Ramel Cedeno.
Yes, thank you, Daryl. And I just want to quickly thank Barbara, Daryl, TJC, and the Rainbow Push Coalition. These last couple of days have been very energizing. And sitting at the table with Reverend Jackson, right? My first time meeting Reverend Jackson in person, a huge giant in our movement, right? And I'm an organizer. I've been doing grassroots organizing for the last 15 years. So being in the presence of movement giants is always refreshing and re-energizing. But I quickly want to just lift up the critical role that our people play in the election protection and through election observations, election certification programs, right? In Illinois, it was a lady in a wheelchair that was preventing voters of accessing the polls. In Arizona in 2022, it was people with full tactical gears harassing, intimidating, and coercing voters at the drop box locations.
Right.
And at the league, we have 750 leagues all across this country. So we have a very deep grassroots power on the ground. And when our league in Arizona immediately heard and witnessed this intimidation, they partnered, they worked very closely with our advocacy litigation team to file a lawsuit in courts. So I do want to lift up, right, that even if at the national level, federal courts, especially the Supreme Court, right, is voting against democracy, is voting against voters, it's voting to keep its legacy, and it's not people-centered or people-oriented. But in some places, we have to leverage the courts. And so the league immediately filed a lawsuit, and the court agreed with our argument, right, that voters could not be intimidated in any way, shape, or form. And they immediately asked that anti-voting rights group, that I won't say their name because they're very well known, they immediately ordered them to stop and desist, right? To stop intimidating, because voters in this country, regardless, have rights, right? We have the right to be able to cast our ballot without intimidation, without harassment, and without being coerced. So I wanted to lift that up as well.
And it's very interesting that you lift that up, Ramel, because, you know, Edward and Jada, a large part of what people think of when they think of voter suppression, they think of voter intimidation, they start thinking about the South. They think about Louisiana, they think about Mississippi, they think about Alabama. They don't necessarily think about Illinois. They don't necessarily think about Northern Virginia. They don't think about Indiana, New York. Many of the areas where Ohio, many of the areas where it continues to exist. But, you know, Jada, you as well as Edward had the opportunity to actually go down to Florida. And for most people, many people, they don't think of Florida as the South. Can you share some of the experience of what it was like when you went down for that rolling protest this past Juneteenth?
So first and foremost, I would like to say that Florida is most definitely the South. Outside of culture and politics, the weather alone will let you know that you have stepped into the South. When we got to Florida, we walked in on a whole bunch of thermostats. And what I mean by that is they were checking the temperature, and not only were they checking the temperature, they were ready to change it. So in the South, there's a kind of pride that's different. We know what we've done to get to where we are. And people laugh at us. People call us backwards. People say that we're slow, but we're very smart. And we can see when there are roadblocks in our way, and we know how to jump over them or to avoid them as best as possible. So when we got out there, they were happy to see us. People of all colors, black, white, blue, brown. They were there greeting us, chanting. They were out there getting the literature that has been stripped from their bookshelves, out of their classrooms, out of their universities. There's nothing more South than that. There's nothing more Southern than that. We're an extremely prideful people. So to see that let me know I knew I was home in a way. I'm from Louisiana, but we had that same pride out there in Florida, and it was showing on all of their faces that they're ready to fight, that they're ready to change the temperatures, not just check it. So the next time the thought comes in your mind that Florida is not the South, I want you to look at where the Mason-Dixon line actually is. And everything below that is the South, whether you like it or not.
I concur. Florida is most definitely the South, right? And being in Florida, seeing folks who came out to receive banned books, folks who were excited to receive banned books. I mean, you have books like Ruby Bridges that gets banned. The vice president's books get banned. And these folks have had their access to this education cut off. And I think one of the biggest tactics that have been done in the South as well as the North is the miseducation of the voter. And by cutting off those, by banning those books, that was another tactic geared at miseducating the voters about what has happened in history and what is happening now, and cutting off that connection. And so being out there and seeing folks who are excited about getting this information, who are excited about learning this history, but more so who are excited about teaching the next generation this information, it really spoke volumes to me, because it says that this is a form of education that we intend to take throughout the generations. Carter G. Woodson said it best: the educational system of a country is worthless unless it revolutionizes the social order. When you look at the banned books that have been banned in Florida, these are books that revolutionize the social order. And so you want to stop the revolutionary by forcing folks into a deep sleep, right? So that's where woke goes to die. But these folks have made it clear. Florida is not the place where woke goes to die. It's the place where woke will be resurrected.
So, and, Griselda, interestingly, Illinois has taken a very proactive step in dealing with banned books and actually disallowing banned books in the state. Could you share with us, number one, did you ever think that you would be in a period of time where there would have to be legislation to say you can't ban a book, that it's illegal to ban a book, as opposed to opening up for educational purposes?
And Griselda, tell people your region and all the states that you cover.
Sure. Well, thank you, Daryl and Barbara, for inviting me. So quickly, I am with the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, known as MALDEF. And so we're a national law firm, civil rights law firm. And I am the regional counsel of the Chicago-based Midwest office that covers 14 geographic states in the Midwest. Yes, everything from the Dakotas down through Arkansas, Minnesota, Missouri, and up through Michigan, and everything in between. And I think what Barbara said earlier, or what we're talking about here, right? People think about the Midwest, and I've lived out in New York, I've lived out in Washington, and people sort of forget about the middle of the country. And as someone who was born and raised here, I'm always like, no, the Midwest is where it is happening. The people are, we as a community, we're here. We have a long history of being, especially because I was born and raised in Chicago and in Illinois, right? Of being, protecting people's rights. And so did I ever think that I would reach a point in my career or in my lifetime that I'd have to live in a state where we're not banning books and we're actually passing affirmative legislation? No. But that is the place in history where we are. And so I think it behooves all of us in this room, who's watching and via live stream, to really recognize that we're in a very, very precarious part of history. Yes. We're a very divided country, and we have to, in places like Illinois, we have to start protecting people's rights. And if that means passing affirmative legislation where we're protecting basic rights, then that's what we have to do, right? And so there are places like, we work with our partners at Rainbow Push and TJ and the League of Women Voters and a multitude of other places, because it is important to inform our communities, because that, I think, is the biggest threat to our democracy. There is so much misinformation out there, and I agree with you. They want us to not know. They want to scare us. They want us to believe that we have no rights. And what I say to my clients every day, whether you're undocumented or not, in this country, you are a person, and every person has rights, federal rights. And not everybody has every right, but we do have some basic fundamental rights. And when it comes to voting, for those of us who can vote, it is absolutely in our power to take that power back. It is so important to vote. And, we were talking about earlier about the importance of understanding how that voting is power. And at least for the Latino community, we are not homogenous. We are very different. But it is so important for us to know that we are now the largest minority majority in this country. Every 30 seconds, an 18-year-old Latino turns 18 and is eligible to vote.
Yes.
And we've got to mobilize that youth to because they are our future. But we've got to engage them. We've got to tell them that they have the power to change our future. And when I look at these two young people next to me, and I do say young because I'm like Betty. I hear you, sister. You guys are our future, and it's so great to hear. MALDEF advocates for, affirmative legislation to protect those rights because, as our governor has said, if this is the place that people can come and be a safe haven, then that's what we're going to be.
Amen.
And Griselda, you touched on something, and I know Barbara Arnwine, her ears perked up. I know mine perked up, my eyes lit up, and they started to roll around when you talked about young voters.
Yes.
Because one thing that Rainbow Push Coalition and Transformative Justice Coalition do is that we push for young voters, and we out there and we invest in young voters. And we tell people all the time that, those Confederate statues that came down, those young voters that made that happen. The George Floyd police reform bill that was being active, that was young voters that were out there pushing for that. The environmental justice bill that was passed, young voters pushing that through. Gun control, young voters pushing that through. So Barbara, I gotta ask you, when we hear about this attorney, and you're getting ready to see Barbara do a 360 with her head. When you hear about this attorney, Cleta Mitchell, saying we need to make it more difficult for college students to vote, more difficult for young voters to be able to vote. Barbara, how do you respond to that?
We respond by saying we're going to do everything possible to make sure young voters vote. That's the answer. Let's be very clear, people. In Georgia, in 2020, it was young voters that turned that state around. Young voters. When people talk about, what's the miracle of what they call the Brandon Johnson mayoral election. Young voters did it again. You see, the future of this country is young voters. And that's what scares them. Because the young voters aren't for all of this, white political domination. They're not for that. They believe because they've grown up in a world where they've seen people internationally. They got friends they talk to all around the globe. They got a whole different perspective. It doesn't scare them to see people of color. It's a different kind of reality for them. And that's why they're doing everything they can to isolate folks by enacting that, that horrible decision of the Supreme Court to get rid of diversity in education, in admissions, because they'd rather the kids never meet anybody of color and realize how much we all have in common. And that we all can unite if we're going to have a better world, if we're going to have a future world where we address this climate change. It's going to take young people, because it's their future that's endangered. And so I want people to be very clear that young voters is everything. We at TJC, we invest in young people. Every year we train at least 100 young people in how to be the best leaders they can be. And when I say we train folks, let me be very clear. We pay everything. Airfare, hotel costs. We pay for transportation, meals, everything. Plus, we give a stipend of money because folks' time is valuable. And don't tell me young people don't deserve to be compensated. Don't tell me that, because their time is valuable also. And I want you to understand that to build the future, we got to invest in young people. I get so mad because people always say, oh, they this, they that. And I'm like, honey, what were you? Because I remember when we were running around in hot shorts and all the rest of it. But anyway, don't tell me. But and I say it's not the problem. It's not the young people. The problem is that we don't invest in young people. Let's do what has to be done. Let's build this generation. And Cleveland Mitchell, go sit down, because we're about to show you what young people can do. Wait for 2024.
And Jada, your generation, that Generation Z, Gen Z, and particularly the women of Gen Z, you're like the bullseye of the target of what they're shooting for. And so when they start talking about restricting reproductive freedom, they're talking your generation. When they start talking about the banning of books to cut off the access to your history, that's your generation and Generation Alpha that's coming up behind you. So when we hear about these challenges now that are being...
I could interrupt you. Or Reverend Lee.
Oh, Reverend? Oh.
That's what I was trying to tell you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson.
And Harold, we want everyone to know that Reverend Jackson came to be with our young people in Houston.
Absolutely.
For that training. And we cannot talk about young without talking about Reverend Jackson.
Love you guys so much. I've been up since about 3 o'clock this morning. I got to get me a little bit of nap. We had big labor Friday night. Let me say, when Brandon said he won by 26,000 votes, and he was 2.8%, I joined, he was like 6%. 21,000 high school seniors in this city of Chicago. Put 12,000 on the books, 4,000 inmates who are on, what did Bobby call it, pre-trial
Pre-trial release.
detention? 16,500 pre-trial detention. High school seniors voted, and nobody had polled them. We intended that 3.3 million high school seniors registered to vote, and because death penalty is sake, right? Also, I said to the inmates, why should I vote, Reverend? I said, you can vote and determine who the judges are. They jumped real high on that. The inmates can determine judges, so can determine the cost of education. Y'all hang with Barbara, I got to go now.
Thank you, Reverend. Now, let's address what Reverend just lifted up. Let's address what he just lifted up, because there's a big nugget that was just dropped. And I want to be certain that no one misses what he said. In the United States, there's felony disenfranchisement that goes on. And as a part of that felony disenfranchisement, folks believe, many mistakenly, that because they've been convicted of a felony, that they are forever barred from the right to vote. And in many states, that is not true. We know from our research that the impact of that misinformation has resulted in a minimum of 6 million voters that are not voting, although they're eligible to vote. In addition, there's a sphere of influence that they have that touches another 12 million voters. So you're looking at 18 million voter impact from the disenfranchisement misinformation. But what has happened, and I know Barbara Armwine wants to speak to it, or Jada, one of the things that our panelists, one of the things that addresses this felony disenfranchisement is the Freedom to Vote Act,
Right.
where it begins to level the field in understanding. And Jada, or one of the panelists, I'm gonna turn it over to you, but let me just put this nugget out there, 'cause I want everyone to be certain they're getting this. What happens that in each of the states, they all determine when and if your right to vote after being convicted of a felony can be restored. There's a lot of inconsistency. In the state of Mississippi, and I always go there because I consider them the worst. In the state of Mississippi, if you're convicted of a felony in the state of Mississippi, you lose your vote, your right to vote. Your right to vote is restored only by a vote of the Mississippi General Assembly for each individual to get their right to vote back. You contrast that to Vermont and Maine, where you never lose your right to vote. Even if you're incarcerated, you don't lose your right to vote. So I open it up to the panel to talk about this felony disenfranchisement and the disparate impact that it has for those that are some pretrial, not convicted, and don't know, and others that perhaps have been convicted of misdemeanors and aren't able to vote and don't know. Jada?
So during our most recent legislative session in Louisiana, sadly, HB 321 was passed. And what HB 321 is, basically all juvenile records in Jefferson, Caddo, and East Baton Rouge Parish have become public. So now all of these juveniles can be discriminated against based on their prior records. And we all know that everything is cyclical, right? So now you can be discriminated against in higher education because you get background checks to go to public institutions. You get background checks in order to receive jobs. You get background checks in order to receive housing. So now you're lacking all of these resources. There's an extremely high likelihood that you're going to end up in prison. We have Angola. Angola was formerly a plantation. It still is a plantation because, I mean, at the end of the day, slavery is still in the Constitution and it's allowed in our prison system. But it speaks to what we were talking about earlier and how they're trying to disenfranchise the youth, and they're starting at the root, not just in education, but in your basic freedoms as well. You won't be able to get an education because they can tell you, hey, no. And what are you going to do? You're going to fight to get what you can, even if it's not in the best ways, even if it's not the best avenues. So now you're stuck. You end up being one of these felons that don't necessarily know your voting rights. My uncle was actually one of those people. He took me to my college orientation at LSU. And, at all colleges, they sit outside and say, hey, are you registered to vote? Well, if you're not registered to vote, we can get you set up. Well, he had to say, well, I'm a felon. I can't vote. And somebody a couple of months down the line actually sat in front of me and explained to me that he could eventually. So I had to go home and tell him that. But thinking about all the other youth that HB 321 is putting at risk to end up like my uncle was, and then turn around and thinking that they can't vote, it's really, really disheartening. But it shows that they're ready to attack us. They're ready to take everything that we have away because they see the power that we do have. But the way they're starting it is at the root with your juvenile records, at least where I'm from. In Florida, they made it to where as long as you're on probation or you're following the terms of your probation, you can vote. And it was a nonviolent offense. Well, they turned around and made it to where you have to pay any court costs, any fees. Now you can't vote because a lot of those people can't pay those fees. So they're giving us these little tidbits, they're giving us crumbs and then snatching them away and then telling us that we wrong because we're hungry and we fighting for it once again. So.
But one thing You know, one thing we wanted to talk about during this panel, because we know the problems are severe, but what's the answer, right? What can we do? One thing is that 18 million who are eligible to vote. There are 6 million who really do have serious obstacles, like Mississippi, Florida, you know, with the fees and fines and others. But there are 18 million people, a good couple million right here in Illinois, by the way. I'm serious. One of the biggest groups is right here in Illinois, who don't know that they have the right to vote. And what we got to do, if we're going to really be successful in this fight, is that all of our groups, all of our civic engagement groups, all of our churches, everybody has to take this on as a number one educational priority, and making sure that every time we can, that we make sure that people know of their right to vote. I know this from practice. I helped to create election protection, right, in 2000. And we get calls to the hotline, and I got a call that actually came in from a man, and he was hot mad. He told me, he said, my family, they up here bothering me, telling me that I got the right to vote, and I keep telling them I'm a felon, and I can't vote in this state. And it's just, and I said, sir, tell me more. And he talked to me some more. And I asked him a couple more questions. I said, sir, you are totally eligible to vote in your state. And he started crying. And the whole family, you could hear him in the background cheering and crying. He's one of millions, folks, throughout the country. The problem is that we have to, across the board, as organizations, as individuals, don't count yourself out if you're an individual, as churches, as all kinds of institutions, we got to come together and really make it a priority. The average congressional election is decided by what? 2,000 votes. If we had the capacity to restore all of the people who are eligible to vote, then what can we accomplish? It would be amazing. So let's, have as one of the takeaways from this session is that let's combine and create the most powerful voter education program ever in the United States to restore the right to vote.
And Betty Magus, I believe you wanted to
Have young
weigh
people
in.
have to help me. They have to help me out. He had to turn the mic on. I'm bragging, okay? In Illinois, I work with a young group called Chicago Votes.
Yes.
We were 4 votes away from getting voting in prison rights this past legislature. They are serious. And I'm working with them because they know what they're doing. And I'm trying to learn. Okay. But Reverend Jackson fought, and we've had the right here in Illinois for years, going back to Mayor Harold Washington, as Reverend said. If you are in jail and have not been to trial, haven't been convicted, in Illinois, you can vote. And we always take thousands out. We even have the right, with legislation that was passed, there is a polling place in Cook County Jail. They get to vote. They vote the last 3 Sundays before Election Day. We go in. I'm vice chair of Chicago League of Women Voters, and we go in all the time. But I go in as Rainbow Push because I don't want Rainbow Push to get left out because we started it. People brag about the fact that you can vote in jail now, but they don't realize it was Reverend Jackson that fought. When Harold Washington won, like he said, they wanted to fight because he won by the margin of number of people who were in jail who voted for him. It's a big deal here in Illinois. If we get voting rights in prison, it'll really be a big deal. But that's why I brag on Illinois. The problem we have is getting the word out to those persons who have gotten out of prison. One of the things that was passed with the help of the Chicago Lawyers for Civil Rights was when you're getting out of prison, they have to train you on your rights, and that includes telling you that you are eligible to vote when you're released from prison in Illinois. And I just think everybody else ought to try it. It works.
Right. And let's, Ramel and then Barbara.
Yeah, go ahead.
In organizing, we believe in celebrating our wins, even if they're small. And so this past legislative session in Minnesota, we won the right for returning citizens with felony convictions to be able to vote, right? So that was a huge win for us this year. But I do want to lift up something very important that we're discussing, which is it's very critical for us as movements to be able to do the relational organizing. It's easy for us as organizations and movements to reach out to voters that we don't know, to people that we don't know, but we're leaving power at the table. It is critical for us to take seriously the relational organizing aspect of the work that we're calling to do in this moment, right? Many of these potential voters are our family members, aunts, uncles, cousins,
Amen.
siblings, parents, whatever it is. They're attending our churches.
Yes.
Right? They're shopping at the same stores where we go to shop. They live in our communities. And so if we're not reaching out to our neighbors, our families and friends to share that message and share the word on our rights, then we're leaving a lot of power on the table. And the other thing is that I think that we also have to educate people that have the right to vote and don't do it,
Right.
that's an active decision that carries implications,
Yes.
right? That's the other side of the coin. By you not voting, you're supporting the current power structures in place, right? You're complicit in the election of the people that are currently in power.
Yes.
You're complicit in the current anti-voting or anti-democracy policies as well. So we have to educate folks holistically that if they exercise their right to vote, they're exercising their right to a now and to a future, right? To that future that we're all holding for multiracial, multi-generational, participatory and equitable democracy in this country. But if you don't vote, that's also an active decision that you're making, right? So that's the other thing that I wanted to lift up.
And Barbara, I know that you're going to make your remarks, but in your remarks, could you address, because we want to lift up what we can do in the fight that's going on right now. And we know that right now, for instance, in the state of Georgia, we just came through the runoff election there,
Yes.
where they had changed the rules such that absentee ballots, there would not be enough time for someone to register to be able to participate in the runoff election there. There wasn't enough time for seniors to be able to receive the absentee ballots and to mail them back in to be counted there. We also know that they are now proposing through the ACE Act that you talked about, yearly purging of voters and getting rid of voters from the poll.
Yes.
Could you, in your response, and Reverend Jackson loves to talk about the automatic voter registration.
Yes.
Could you link all that together in the response to what you're talking about right now?
Yeah, I want to talk about two things real quick. Betty is so correct. Every day in this country, there are 500,000 people who are jailed, but not convicted. They haven't been tried yet. Under the U.S. Constitution, you can only lose your right to vote if you've been convicted. All throughout the country, the kind of programs they have in Illinois to help people who are pre-trial, who have never been convicted, but are sitting there because what? They can't pay money bail? The Sandra Blands of the world, who can't pay the bail money. We want to remind people that you can, in any state, Alabama, all these other states, you should be insisting that they have the right to vote is provided through some kind of balloting procedure for those people sitting in jail who are not convicted. So I want that to be clear. That's the first thing. The second thing, Romel talked about the people who do not vote. Here's what we know. We know this as a fact, that 30%, if you register new voters, only 30% of them will vote. If you don't do anything to help and encourage them to vote. That's why what we at the TJC, at Transformative Justice Coalition, is adamant about all our organizations and partners really promoting voter contacts. Voter contacts make all the difference in the world. And let's be clear, when I say voter contacts, I'm not talking about politicians leaving door knockers saying, vote for me. That's not what really motivates voters. What we know, what motivates voters is groups following up with voters, which is why Florida passed that stupid provision saying the groups couldn't in Florida. And that's why I'm proud of the Florida NAACP for taking them to court and with the league and stopping that, and making sure that they can, get access to those lists and have the ability to help people. But I want to be clear that voter contacts are everything. They're the telephone calls. How are you? So proud you're registered to vote. Just want to make sure you're aware that the next election is X date. Calling again. You know that in a couple weeks, the election will be held. I just want to make sure that you have what you need. Really? They didn't send you your card? Really? They didn't do X? You said they changed your polling place? Really? Well, here's where you can find out how to get to your polling place. Go to Vote 411 at the league and find your polling place locator. I mean, that's what makes a difference. When you call and what you'd say to people is, I'm not telling you who to vote for, but I want to make sure you vote. And that you vote what your heart tells you to vote. And I am one of those people who believe that I don't have to tell people how to vote. If I make sure that they're not blocked from voting, they'll vote the right way. So voter contact systems, their phone, their postcards, their walking the block, the canvassing, their all of these, different ways of making sure that you contact and talk to voters. Guess what happens if you do voter contacts? If you do 8 voter contacts after somebody is registered to vote, their probability of voting goes from 30% to 85%. That's where we're neglecting our power. We got to have the most aggressive voter contact systems ever in these times with all of this voter suppression going on. So Daryl, I just wanted to, lift those two things up and because it's so key. I don't want people to leave and say, wow, I just heard the same old. I want you to hear about different ways we can do this because we're in it to what? Win it.
That's right. And, it's really significant. We stand here today on July the 18th. On the birthday of Nelson Mandela, who stayed in jail, in prison for 27 years and for the right to vote. They wanted the right to vote. And so this forum that we're bringing you today is in that spirit. It's with that type of understanding. And I've got to ask both Jada and Edward, both have come through what we call the Transformative Justice Coalition Millennial Gen Z Voter Training. Now, there are people that are watching now that are wondering if they should participate in this type of training and what's involved. Am I just going to get a free trip out of this? Can I just come to DC for the Congressional Black Caucus or we'll be in Phoenix, Arizona in April of next year for something that's going on there for our other training? What advice would you give those folks?
The advice I give those folks is, first and foremost, you got to do the trainings. because there's so much information that's available, information that you can take back to your home state and utilize. And I say that because we're here in Illinois, right, where presumably we're pretty progressive when it comes to voting rights and all of that. It sounds good. But when in practice, there have been a lot of situations that have played out that have tried to attempt to target the right to vote in this country, in the state of Illinois. And so coming back from one of the trainings, I understood that when you get in line, let's say in Illinois, before a certain time, I think it was before 7 o'clock. If you're in line before 7 o'clock, then you have the right to vote at that time. So my wife and I had gotten in line to vote at 6:59. Technically and legally, it's still before 7 o'clock. Right. So we're in line, and one of the folks at the polling place said to my wife, "You cannot vote because the polling places are closed." I said, "Absolutely not. It is illegal. In fact, the law says as long as you are in line before 7 o'clock, you have the right to vote." What they did at that moment was they got quiet, his face got a little stale, and then they handed us a ballot. And so in that moment, going to these trainings really gives you the information and emboldens you to be able to utilize this information to say, you know what? I know I have rights. Not only do I know I have rights, but I'm going to utilize my ability to fight for my rights.
Whenever other youth ask me about the training and how I felt about it, I always tell them I'm glad I'm an early bird because you can't miss those trainings. If they say you need to be downstairs at 7 o'clock in the morning because we're starting at 7:05, you need to be downstairs at 6:55 because there's not no child left behind. They're not going to leave you behind, but they will start without you. They will start without you. And I say this because I know it's funny, but before you even put in an application, you need to humble yourself. Don't come in thinking you know everything, because when I tell you I came in thinking, well, I know about my state, I realized I knew nothing. From the first question that was asked to me when I walked in to introduce myself and tell me something about your state. Well, actually, Jada, what you said, that's not all the way right. And I couldn't argue because I'm in a room with people that I'm here to learn from. And that's the biggest thing you need to understand. You need to humble yourself in order to learn, because if you're not humble, you can't, take in the information and then go back like Edward did and go back like Bree did and stand your ground and say, no, I can vote, or no, he can vote, or no, she can vote. It takes a certain level of humility to be willing to learn, to be willing to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning after you went to sleep at 10 o'clock. But you will be happy to do it because you're learning so much and you're saving so many people. Not only yourself, you're saving your grandma, your auntie, your uncle, your cousin. Because as my fellow panelists said, we have power sitting at the kitchen table with us. And so the training will make you learn that. And when I left, me and a couple of the other fellows, we started the Open Books Coalition. And I started talking about it. I was like, hey, we're trying to give out banned books. They're not banned in Louisiana just yet, but it's probably coming. We said, okay, this is what we want to do. Well, I'll help you get your 501c3 status. So I'll help you get a grant for these banned books once you get your 501c3 status. TJC gave that to me, but that's because I came before them with humility and knowing and understanding that I did not know everything. So that's my piece of advice.
And so, Griselda, as we start moving toward a close, we've heard a lot that has been laid out with regards to experiences in Florida, in Arizona, in North Carolina. We ain't even got to North Carolina. That would be another 2 hours. Texas, right? But Griselda, when we hear about all of this, can you share with our audience what MALDEF has identified as some of the best practices for getting people out to vote and for holding elected officials accountable?
Sure. So, look, I want to first say that the fight is everywhere. And as proud as a Chicagoan, Illinoisan I am, I hate to say this, Betty, but I sued the state of Illinois because we believed that there was some redistricting issues against the Black and Latino communities. Now, we didn't we won part of that lawsuit, but I just want to be clear that for MALDEF, we sue Democratic states and we sue Republican states because the power is with the people sitting in this room, and we can't always trust that the government's going to do the right thing.
That's right.
So let's be really clear. So we're always paying attention. And so some of the best practices I think we've already discussed, which is really it is going to be about voter contact, the human contact, us, our aunties, our sisters, our brothers, our cousins, everybody, our neighbors, because the politicians are going to do what they need to do, but there's so much misinformation out there. And so to get the ability, to hear it from people that they trust, let's face it, that's where the power is, to be able to have people who are knowledgeable, like, we were just talking, right? It's like, if you know what your rights are, you can stand up and say, wait, no. I know I can be here at 6:59. You are not going to take that power away from me. And just because you raise your voice and you actually stand up for your rights, then you know that they know that you're not going to go away, right? And so the best practice is you got to know your rights. And for MALDEF, that has been a central and critical component of everything we do, whether it's employment, education, et cetera. There is knowledge and power. And so when people know their rights, that's where we win. And so we have to get the information out. For us, it's always in two languages, English and Spanish, or Spanglish. And we've got to make sure that we reach out to folks, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, right, we are a country divided. Let's face it, a lot of people hear voting rights and they just want to tune out because it's so ugly and everybody's just sort of over it. And so it's really about us engaging in conversation and reminding them, as Romel said earlier, if you're not helping and you're not voting, you're part of the problem. Right. And so you've got to go out and vote, because if you don't vote, then you can't say or complain later. And so we've got to be able to go out there and to educate people and give them the power to vote and to get others to vote. And 2024 is going to be critical. And so we've all got homework. And this is what I say to my interns and my staff. Every election cycle, you got to get out 5 people that you got to call 5 people on election day, at least on election day. And leading up to that, every day it's a reminder, right? Because you just got to remind folks that they have to get out and vote. And so at the end, we just want to make sure that we're a resource. I always say to people, call us, call all of these organizations, because if you don't know, we'd rather you call us, a trusted source. And, you may get the crying gentleman who, but they trusted you, right? And they believed you and not the relative, but that's okay. That's what we're here to do. We're here to provide that information. And so I will just leave you by saying, we are a coalition of partners, but we are also in it together as a community. And so our power is among us. And so we have to help each other. We have to be there for each other. And we just have to remind folks that we are here to get to let the powers that be know that we're not going to go away. So the last thing that I know you asked me about public officials, same thing. Hold them accountable. And how do you do that? Wait, let me ask this quick question. How many of you in here actually know how to get a hold of your legislator or your politician? That's pretty good. I've asked that question in other presentations. I'm going to tell you the answer is not so great. So 1, you got to know who your congressperson or your legislator or your official is, right? 2nd, how to get a hold of them. And you got to pay attention. When my interns come into my office, the first thing I do is I let them listen to a city council meeting. And they are shocked at what goes on in those city council meetings. And why? Because you guys would be shocked to hear what the people that we pay with our tax dollars are doing on our alleged behalf. So when something doesn't go wrong or something doesn't go right, you got to pick up that phone or send an email or direct DM, like the young people say, right? Let them know you're watching, because that is how we hold them accountable. Amen. And when they don't do what we say, that's when all of these folks are going to get together and we're going to show up at the office and make a statement letting them know that we're paying attention.
Thank you, Griselda. And before we go to Barbara Arnwine for her closing comments, I'm sorry, Ramel, did you? Okay. Before we go to Barbara and her closing comments, one of the things you talked about is in holding folks accountable that when something happens in your community that affects you and your family, then you know it's time to hold that elected official accountable, particularly when it applies to your family. And, I can think of no better example than a family that is here today, that when the prosecutor told them that there was nothing they could do to arrest the people, the three men, white vigilantes that killed their son, Ahmaud Arbery, they said that's not an acceptable answer. And they went after that prosecutor. It was beyond the time for anyone to run against that prosecutor, and she was in the middle of the election. Deadline had passed. The family got with the community, did a petition, got another name on the ballot to run against that prosecutor. And for the first time in Glenn County history, an incumbent prosecutor was defeated. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the family of Ahmaud Arbery. Stand up, y'all.
Yes.
The power of the vote. That's the power of the vote and of the people. Folks, as Barbara Arnwine prepares to bring us to a close with the closing remarks, we want to encourage you that if you have someone between the ages of 18 and 35, that you have them go to tjcoalition.org and have them sign up for the training that you heard Jada and Edward speak of. Our next training will be September the 20th through the 24th. In Washington, D.C. during Congressional Black Caucus weekend. We also encourage you to go to tjcoalition.org to find out more information about what we're doing and where we are. You can follow us on Twitter at TJC_DC or on Facebook. And you can also catch us every Tuesday at noon Eastern Standard Time on Igniting Change on WOLDCnews.com or BarbaraArnwine.com. So for the closing remarks, Barbara, can you bring us home?
All right. First of all, thank you, Daryl, for moderating. You got a great job. Great job. And also, I want to thank this entire audience for being here. We know there was a lot of competition, but you made it to this spot. Thank you for that. I want to thank all the panelists. I tell you, we can't do it by ourselves. It takes all of us pulling together. The league, I'm constantly sending people to, to vote 411 because it's a great resource. And, when people tell you, I don't want to vote because I don't know nothing about those judges or that person, they can find out everything they need to know. Right there on Vote 411. There's all kinds of information that people would not know. We talk, MALDEF stands in the battle every darn day, fighting against vote dilution, fighting to make sure that ballots are in the languages that they should be in. And by the way, that's under attack by these folks, these anti-democracy folks. They want to get rid of multilingual ballots or bilingual balloting. They just don't believe it should exist. Like I said, they don't think we should exist as voters. So we got battles. Our young people did they actually had a command center where people could call in with complaints. Guess what we got, folks, in 2 different states? Literacy tests. Yep. Literacy tests. Literacy tests.
Explain what you mean by that, Barbara.
They actually, in Minnesota, in one of the counties right around Minneapolis, had the nerve to say to anybody who was Latino who came to vote that they had to recite. They had to read and recite a provision that they were given to read and recite.
In English.
Only in English. Only Latinos. Whites, wave them through. I just want people to understand that this battle You know, the forces of regression are always out there. They're always trying to take us back. Our battle is to always move forward and to always use any technology, anything that's out there to our advantage. So here's what's going to be happening over the next couple of months this year. There are major elections coming up in November. We'll be in Virginia. And we're going to roll through the state of Virginia to make sure that for those statewide elections that people know about their right to vote. We're going to roll. When I say roll, you guys have, if you have, you'll go to our Facebook and Transformative Justice Coalition, and you'll see the John Lewis Freedom Bus. And you will find out about how that bus rolls and how people respond to it and how people want to get involved. And of course, we roll with Black Voters Matters. Hey, and, with the blackest bus in America. So we do all of that. And we also, work with so many other groups like Expo and the returning rights, that's the restoration of rights for citizens. We got battles to still wage in so many states to make the law right so that people's rights are there. So what we're going to do is we're going to be in Kentucky. Watch out. Mississippi. Watch out. We are not going, Louisiana. We're not going to do it. And people are begging. They're saying, please come to Texas, come to other states, because we need to keep the spirit up. Remember, half of this battle is keeping people inspirited. When Harriet Tubman went and did all of those, quote, 19 raids, and when she also, the free people, but when she also did the Comanche River raid, that where she was the first woman to lead Union troops, any kind of troops, federal troops in the U.S., and she freed, 1,000 people in that one raid? What people don't understand is each time she did that, she sang. She sang Still Away to Jesus. She sang Go Down Moses. She sang It's Time for Glory Land. She sang every time. And even during the Comanche River raid, while they're shooting, while there's all this going on and people are being, freed and are running to get on those gunboats so they can go to freedom out of South Carolina, while this is happening, folks, understand that she's singing the whole time. Come on, children. And so people don't understand that part of our job is not the details one by one, but it's making sure that people understand that we got to stand up and fight constantly. So not only are we going to roll with the John Lewis bus, not only are we going to do the training in September, next year, be on the outlook. Keep going to tjcoalition.org because we're going to have a major conference where we're going to pull together over 400 young people, where we're going to pull together hundreds of all of you who have been following TJ and have come down to Brunswick, have come to Florida, have done all kinds of stuff with us. And we're going to have a major coordination training so that when we get to November, we won't just be scrambling like crazy in September. We're going to be so ready, so powerful, and we're going to do everything that God has given us the strength to do to make sure that America becomes the true multiracial and just nation that it can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I want to thank all of our panelists for participating this afternoon. Griselda Vega Samuel and Ramel Sandino, Betty Magnus and Edward Ward and Jada Jeffrey. Thank all of you for participating on this panel. Folks, as we like to say, as we close out with Igniting Change, it's time to get off the sidewalks and get into the streets. Let's make it to the voting box. Let's be certain we get registered, be certain our families and friends are registered, and let's be certain that we hold our elected officials accountable and protect that right to vote. Thank you all.
Thank you. You did it. You said it. Thank you.